Hey nozzle heads, welcome. Today I'm going to talk to you about my favorite slicer setting aside from the slice button itself. It is called ironing. So normally when you have a 3D print, you can see the surface is a little rough, you can see the layer lines. And if you're interested in selling a 3D print or you want to give it as a gift, you want it to look as good as possible. And those things just to me look a little unprofessional. It makes it look handmade, right? So ironing allows you to make those surfaces much more glossy, eliminate the layer lines, and make them look so much more aesthetically pleasing. That's what I want to cover today. I'm working in Bamboo Studio. However, any slicer you have also has ironing settings. They may be called something slightly different, but they all do the same things. You can learn the same beneficial concepts that you can apply to your 3D prints. So let's get started. So remember, in this video, I am going to initially isolate each parameter and setting in ironing. That way we can demonstrate and see what each one of those does. It isn't until the very end that we can see and combine what we've learned to pick the best possible set of parameters that as a team give the best possible print quality. So if that's really all you're interested in, just skip to the end of the video. You don't need any of this fancy stuff and experimentation. But if you're ready, buckle in and let's iron. So the first setting we have is ironing type. So default is no ironing, and that is what we have right here. So this is a normal 3D print. I made this, I don't know, target, concentric circles, eyeball, nipple, whatever the heck this thing looks like, to try to demonstrate to you using two different colors and somewhat a flat surface what the difference is between these ironing types. So with this being a standard print, you can see the lines. So you see 3D print lines both on the black, and you can also see them on the white. It may be hard to see. I'm trying to get the light right, but either way, this is a normal 3D print. And then the raised surfaces here, notice on all of the next prints, ironing doesn't help that. That's just layer lines, and you've got to use small layer lines if you want to eliminate that. So next, the next ironing type that we have is called top surfaces. So top surfaces, you see a significant difference. You don't see layer lines. This looks aesthetically pleasing, high quality. The blue eyeball here looks much better. If you get in the right light, you can see a little bit of lines, but for the most part, this is a major improvement over no ironing at all. Then we have topmost surfaces. So this you do, in fact, see some layer lines. So top surfaces is better. It takes longer, but if you only do topmost surfaces, it is better than no ironing at all. Don't get me wrong, it absolutely is, but it's still, you can see some layer lines, some artifacts. In my opinion, I'd skip it. Go full top surfaces. The other option is all surfaces. So in all surfaces, essentially this we're getting fantastic results here, just like the top surfaces. However, you are sacrificing a lot of time to do all surfaces. The blue looks better than it does in top surfaces, and then the black, I think, looks just as good. So ultimately, those are your four ironing types. My opinion, the best trade-off is certainly to go with top surfaces. You get aesthetically pleasing prints, it looks fantastic, and it has the lowest sacrifice of time. The next setting is ironing pattern. So especially with flat pieces, this really can make a significant difference. So here in Bamboo Lab, the slicer I use, we have rectilinear and we have concentric. I think some other slicers have the other options, but this is what I have available. So right here, you see the ironing is done in concentric circles. Now, if you look dead on at it, you can still kind of see it, but it's a little harder to tell. But that is our concentric circles, and our rectilinear is honestly, I think, better. It's harder to actually notice any of the lines in any pattern. I'm trying to get the light right, but this kind of proves to you that maybe rectilinear is the better one to use, right? But trust me, there are straight lines that are the ironing pattern for this. Ironing speed is the setting that speeds up or slows down your ironing. This one, I'll admit, is a little interesting because it bucks the trend of how I view 3D printing. I believe the default is 30 millimeters per second, so if I lower the ironing speed, my results should be better, right? However, when you lower to 10 millimeters per second, we see these horrible defects. And I printed this multiple times with multiple different filaments, and I always see defects until I realized, and as I did a little more research, when you lower this ironing speed so much, the nozzle dwells too much on individual positions and it starts to melt that top layer and it over extrudes, and that is why you're seeing these horrible defects, ruining the print borderline. And the other thing is it adds so much time. These little discs, that takes 1 hour and 9 minutes to print, and you get that horrible defect. So kind of buck the trend of how what we would normally think about the settings and slowing down will increase quality, because in this case, when this is the only variable you change, that's not true. Now here we have our 30 millimeter per second ironing speed, and so this is the default. This was printed with the default settings of Bamboo, and you can still see right here, there are some defects. Now, the majority of the print looks absolutely fantastic, but there are some defects right here. Again, it's going to depend on what you're printing, and I'm really just trying to demonstrate what these things, how they affect the 3D print, not necessarily tell you this is the best setting for this specific thing that I'm printing. Now, this took 32 minutes, so certainly much better than the 1 hour and 9 minutes the other took. And then finally what I did is 3D print the same thing in 100 millimeter per second ironing speed. So if you take a look, initially you're pretty impressed. There aren't any defects. These look pretty good. It took 19 minutes to print compared to 32 in 1 hour and 9 minutes. That's not bad. Now you will see that although there's no defects, you can see some layer lines on this print. So it's not glossy, it's not super smooth. The ironing could be better. However, there are some other things, other settings, for example, the iron flow rate that you could adjust to accommodate for these to kind of fill those in and make it look better while still achieving that higher speed. Ironing flow is the amount of filament extruded while you are ironing, and this is something, if you choose too high, you're going to get over extrusion at the surface, you're going to get flaws, but also if you choose something too small, that's equally problematic. The default is 10%, so let's start with something I chose 1%. Something really low. Now remember, all the other settings are still at default. I am isolating the flow rate here. So with the blue, I clearly can see some flaws and some artifacts right there. Now, I did the same thing in black just because I really do think it's a lot easier to see in black. So we see some flaws. We see right here it started to look fantastic, and then it started to break down. And it may not look horrible. You don't see as bad of flaws, but obviously something weird's going on there. So the 1% is just too low. So now let's take a look at the 30%. This is the default. So this is though I printed with Bamboo Lab everything in its default setting. So this doesn't look bad. It's pretty glossy. Now you do see, it's not even layer lines. It's almost kind of more of a flaw. I don't know. You see something there, but in small batches, I don't think it's going to be very noticeable. I find it interesting. You can actually see one of the other settings we're going to talk about, which is the ironing inset. You can see the difference between when it was ironing and when it wasn't ironing here on the edges. That's kind of neat. Now, I will say, for some reason, with the blue, I have a lot of flaws. This looks really poor. This is actually the reason I started printing in black, to see if the filament matters. It potentially could. I can't fully express why using the default settings gives something like this on the blue and that the black. But of course, we all know the filaments are different. Both of these were Hatchbox filaments, but obviously of different age and different color. Your printer, there's a lot of variables here. Now this, I have used 18%. So I believe this is fantastic quality. This, Again, trying to show in the light, there's virtually no flaw. It looks really good. It's glossy. You don't see lines. There are no flaws or artifacts whatsoever. Personally, 18% I think is, when you keep everything default, is the perfect flow rate. I don't know why that's not the default. I really think the default setting of 10% is too low. And then finally, again, it may be difficult to see, but I bumped this all the way up to 40% ironing flow. And on the surface, you actually have flaws. They're like little divots, and it feels rough, and there's over extrusion for sure. So that just shows you what the ironing flow can do and why it's so important. It's one of the most important settings in ironing. Let's move on to the next setting. Ironing line spacing is a distance between the lines during the ironing. And in theory, the smaller this setting is, the less you can distinguish the lines, and the better, the more glossy your 3D print is going to look. However, if you go too low, that can also cause some issues. So the standard is 0.15 millimeters. And even in the right light and trying to catch this correctly, I mean, at some point you're going to have to trust me. This, you can't see the lines. It looks fantastic. You can't see layer lines or ironing lines. It's just very good. That's why I think 0.15 is a very good default setting that Bambu has chosen for their settings. Here, just for craps and giggles, I increased the line spacing to 1 millimeter. And again, I hope you can see this. It's somewhat minor. You got to hit the light right, but you can clearly see ironing lines, and they're 1 millimeter. So it doesn't just like ruin the print. These aren't defects, but you can see the lines. And part of ironing is you don't want to be able to see the lines. And so I would stick with the default, but now you can fully conceptualize and really understand what that setting specifically does. Finally, we have ironing inset, and this is the distance from the edge of your print to the iron line. So here I put something really high. I went back to our concentric circles, and you see the circle begins here. So this circle is where we've ironed, and the inset was multiple millimeters. So it doesn't iron in this area. So it can make kind of a cool effect, but in general, you don't want that, right? Because out here, I can see some of the ironing lines, and then I get in here, and it looks fantastic. So just so you know what the inset does, I think the default is fine. You can make it a little closer. I think the 0.21, that's the default, is perfectly fine for this. But now you know what the ironing inset does. So we've seen the ironing definitely helps, but the ultimate question is, what is the best arrangement of settings that you can do for ironing? So number one, obviously, this is going to be dependent on what you're trying to achieve. I am going to assume you want the absolute best quality print. And Bambu almost got this correct, in my opinion. Number one, the default is no ironing. Change that to top surfaces. And then keep all of the other settings exactly the same, but ironing flow changes to 18%. And this will give you what I have right here in my hand. So there is a texture if you get it in the right light, but it's almost more like wood grain. It's definitely not layer lines, and it does not look 3D printed. It's glossy, it looks fantastic. That is my favorite ironing setting, and that's why I love my 3D prints to look like. For example, I have these two unowned Pokemon here. This guy, not only is he bigger, but he was not printed with any ironing. So you can take a look and see there are layer lines everywhere. You can see them. Now in a distance, doesn't make a big deal, but they're clearly there. Now when I look at this smaller little guy, I used ironing on this. And take a look, it's glossier, it looks more professional, it just simply looks of much better quality than this one does. So if you want to sell something or you want to give this as a gift, you want this quality. You don't want it to look like it just came off your printer bed and you made it yourself. You want it to look like a pro did it, and ironing is the way to do that. That is my complete guide to ironing for 3D printing. Now there's a lot of correct answers. My favorite settings aren't necessarily the only correct answer, and I would love to hear what settings you use for your 3D prints to make them look professional and polished. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. Happy printing.